So far in 2023, we've already seen new phones like the Pixel Fold arrive to challenge Samsung's monopoly on big, fancy foldables. Now, OnePlus has created its first device with a flexible display, and despite being a tad late to the party, it comes with several interesting twists. So, here are some of the best and worst things about the OnePlus Open. Similar to Samsung's Galaxy Z Fold line, the OnePlus Open sports two displays, a skinnier 6.3-inch exterior screen, along with a large 7.8-inch flexible panel on the inside. That's slightly bigger than both screens on the Z Fold 5. You also get a variable 120Hz refresh rate on both displays. But the thing OnePlus has really pushed is brightness, which hits around 1400 nits during normal use, or up to a mind-blowing 2800 nits in certain situations like when watching HDR content outdoors. And once again, that brightness applies to both screens. In fact, those numbers are so high it maxed out my colorimeter, so I can't fully verify OnePlus's claims, but I can definitely say brightness is not an issue. As for the rest of the phone, OnePlus hasn't messed around too much with Samsung's template. However, it does feel like the company has tried to shave off every last gram or millimeter. The black model features a vegan leather back and it weighs just 239 grams, which is notably 1 gram lighter than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. While the Emerald Dust model, which we have here, has a glass back and only comes in a touch heavier at 245 grams. The Open is also surprisingly sleek, measuring just 11.7mm thick. That's even thinner than the Pixel Fold, that is until you factor in that massive camera module. When you account for that, we're looking at something closer to around 18mm thick. And for an even better comparison, just check out how this thing stacks up compared to its competitors when you sit it face up on a table. But critically, for OnePlus's first foldable phone, it's created something with a wider exterior display, which makes typing a hell of a lot easier without a ton of added bulk. Of course, some of the biggest areas of concern on a foldable are its hinge and crease. Thankfully, OnePlus has done a pretty good job with both. Now, there is a faint groove that runs down the middle of its main display, but it's subtle. You're only going to see it from acute angles or if you really go looking for it. The hinge is also surprisingly smooth, and unlike its rivals, there's a bit of spring-loaded action to it, so that after a certain point, it just kind of swings wide open. This is pretty nice coming from something like the Pixel Fold, which no matter what you do, feels like it stops at 179 degrees, and often has you wanting to push it harder just to make it open fully flat. Another nice thing is that the Open closes flush, so you don't have to worry about keys or other small objects getting inside. Unfortunately, you only get an IPX4 rating for water resistance, which is far short of the IP68 classification on the Pixel Fold and the Z Fold 5. Now back to its cameras, and judging by the size of that bump, it's clear OnePlus has put a lot of work into that. The Open features a large 64-megapixel Lydia T808 main sensor from Sony, with a new pixel architecture designed to increase the amount of light it can capture for even better nighttime photos. Now, OnePlus claims you get the best image quality on any foldable available today, and while I won't go quite that far, it produces pics that are relatively close to what you can capture with a Pixel Fold. Photos are sharp and detailed. The one shortcoming is that OnePlus's low light processing just isn't quite as good as Google's night sight. You also get a 48-megapixel ultra-wide camera that can also shoot macros, and a 64-megapixel telephoto with a 3x optical zoom that OnePlus says goes up to a 6x lossless magnification. However, my favorite thing about the Open is probably how it handles multitasking. Now, you can obviously do stuff like having two apps open at once in split screen, but if you want even more than that, OnePlus has what it calls Open Canvas, which allows you to have up to 3 apps open at once with little tabs that kind of let you move things around with a single tap. It's like each app is a little card that slides in and out of view exactly when you want it to. And it works really well. It's so much faster than sliding up and holding to open recent apps, but without adding too much visual clutter. On top of that, OnePlus also adds a dedicated icon for recent files, so it's super easy to drag and drop docs or photos into emails and messages. Now that said, as someone who loved older versions of Oxygen OS, I feel like the current design of OnePlus's UI following the company's merger with Oppo just looks a bit cheap. Almost every button is some kind of rounded rectangle, and while it's certainly functional, it's also kind of boring. When it comes to charging, OnePlus has always kind of had somewhat spotty support for wireless charging. Its first phone to have it was the OnePlus 8 Pro, which was years after competitors got on board. That support continued on the OnePlus 9, the OnePlus 9 Pro, and the OnePlus 10 Pro, But then OnePlus dropped support for wireless charging on the 10T and the 11, and unfortunately we don't get it here either on the Open. The lack of wireless charging on any $1,000 phone is pretty disappointing, let alone a brand new flagship foldable. Now, my suspicion is that OnePlus didn't include it because charging coils would have added 1 or 2 millimeters to its thickness, which may have detracted from the phone's overall design. And if that's true, that's a pretty weak justification. On the bright side, wired charging is significantly faster than its competition at 67 watts, and it's even faster in Europe at 80 watts due to their 240 volt power standard. However, because OnePlus's proprietary charging system, you only get those speeds when you use the included brick. So if you switch to a third-party charging adapter, speeds drop in half to around 30 watts. Thankfully, battery life is great. With its exterior display, the OnePlus lasted 25.5 hours on our video rundown test, which is an hour and a half better than the Z Fold 5. And with its main display, it lasted just over 19 hours, which is also more than respectable. Now, when it comes to pricing, big foldables like this have always been pretty expensive. Though at $7,800, the Open does cost $100 less than both the Z Fold 5 and the Pixel Fold. However, to sweeten the pot even further, OnePlus has a rather interesting deal that will knock off another $200 off the price with the trade-in of any phone. And I had to confirm this with OnePlus because the company really does mean any device, regardless of how old it is or what condition it's in. That means you might be able to finally get rid of the Nokia brick that's been living in a drawer for the last 10 or 15 years and finally get some value out of it. And if you do so, you're looking at an effective price of $1,500, which still ain't cheap, but it is significantly lower than the competition. And that's for a phone that comes with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, the latter of which is double what you get from the base configs on the foldable Pixel and Galaxy. Now, to sum things up, when I first heard OnePlus was making a foldable phone, I wasn't sure what their goal was. The company hasn't been in the business of making flagship killers for a while now, but with the Open, the company has crammed some rather impressive hardware into a device with a novel approach to multitasking. The Open's cameras are also just as good, if not slightly better than what you get on a Z Fold 5, and it has bigger screens too, both inside and out. There are actually a lot of things about the Open's design that I wish we were getting from Samsung, as opposed to the 3 years of refinements we've gotten since the Z Fold 3. However, it's also important to note that the Open has an alter ego, because depending on where you live, this thing will also be known as the Oppo Find N3. The two phones are essentially the same device, just with different branding. Now, the Open will still get 4 years of Android updates and 5 years of security patches, along with support for all the major US carriers. However, unlike Google and Samsung's offerings, the Open will only be available through online retailers, and it will likely have more limited options for servicing and repairs. That's kind of a concern because pretty much every foldable I've used to date tends to have an issue with its built-in screen protector bubbling after about a year or so. But for those interested in getting a big, fancy foldable phone with a slightly more affordable price, OnePlus is packing some slick hardware and some notable software tricks into a rather sleek package. And as someone who appreciates the power and adaptability these devices have to offer, I'm kind of impressed with what OnePlus is bringing out of the gate. But what do you think? Now that we've seen 3 cool new foldables in 2023, are you even enticed to jump on board? Or are you still waiting for the prices to come down even further? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned to Engadget for more news, videos, and hands-ons.